The autumn air in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia carried a particular kind of chill that day, one that seeped past the collar of your coat and settled deep in your bones. On an isolated homestead, nestled among trees whose leaves were surrendering to the season in a final blaze of amber and crimson, an old wooden barn stood as a silent witness to the passage of time. Inside, the world was muted. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced through the warped planks, illuminating a lifetime of accumulated belongings. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, forgotten oil, and a profound, unspoken longing. For 65-year-old Eleanor, recently widowed, this space was a mausoleum not of a person, but of a shared existence. Each covered piece of furniture, each box of carefully stored tools, was a chapter in a story she thought she knew by heart. A story that had now come to an abrupt and silent end. Eleanor moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her hands tracing the surfaces of her late husband Arthur's possessions. She wore a simple grey cardigan, the colour of the overcast sky, and her face, though etched with the fine lines of a life fully lived, held a distant look. Outwardly, she was the image of composed grief, a woman dutifully sorting through the remnants of a 50-year partnership. Inwardly, however, she was adrift in an emotional limbo, a quiet storm of anger and abandonment churning beneath the placid surface. Arthur had been a man of few words, his love expressed through solid, dependable actions rather than easy declarations. But his final silence, the one brought by death, felt different. It was a void, a question mark hanging over the solid foundation of the life she believed they had built together. Her routine was a ghost of what it once was, each task a painful reminder of his absence. Her mission for the day was to clear a space near the back wall, to make room for a truck that would come to collect donations. A heavy oak bookshelf, one Arthur had built with his own hands decades ago, stood in the way. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of her new reality, she began to push. The wood groaned in protest, its legs scraping against the dusty floorboards, a sound that echoed the ache in her own joints. As it shifted away from the wall, it revealed something that made her stop, her breath catching in her throat. There, outlined in the grimy wood, was a door. It wasn't just a door, it was a statement. 3 thick, rusty padlocks were threaded through a heavy chain, sealing it shut with an undeniable finality. A cold wave of confusion washed over her. Arthur was not a man of secrets. This locked door felt like a betrayal, a hidden room in the architecture of their marriage she never knew existed. The bolt cutters felt heavy and foreign in her hands, a tool of force in a place that had only ever known gentle care. With a grunt of effort, she positioned the steel jaws around the first padlock. The metallic snap echoed sharply in the barn's quiet, followed by a second, and then a third. The heavy chain slithered to the floor like a dead snake, and the silence that followed was more profound than before. Her hand trembled as she pulled the creaking door open. The faint light spilled into a small, windowless room, revealing a scene that shattered her world. It was a nursery, perfectly preserved from a time long past. A wooden crib stood against a wall, papered with faded blue hot air balloons. Her eyes fell upon a pair of tiny woolen booties on the floor, and the carefully constructed dam around her heart burst. The grief she had suppressed for 40 years erupted with the force of a tidal wave. A choked sob escaped her lips as her legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the dusty floor, lost in a sudden, violent storm of rediscovered pain. It's moments like this, when a life is completely upended by a single discovery, that show us the power of the stories hidden all around us. Subscribing to this channel helps ensure these profound human experiences continue to be shared. The world on the dusty barn floor tilted on its axis, and Eleanor was cast back 40 years to a sterile hospital hallway that smelled of antiseptic and fear. She remembered the unnatural heat of Daniel's small body, a fever that had appeared from nowhere and consumed him with terrifying speed. She remembered Arthur's hand, a vice grip on her own, his knuckles white as he stared at the closed door of the examination room. The doctor's words, when they finally came, were a blur of clinical terms that all meant the same thing. There was nothing to be done. The silence in the car on the way home was a living thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket of disbelief. It was the moment their shared world had fractured, a fault line running right through the heart of their marriage, and she had never realized until now that they had ended up on opposite sides of the chasm. In the weeks that followed, their grief took two vastly different forms. Eleanor wanted to talk, to scream, to fill the hollow rooms of their house with stories of their son, to keep his memory alive by speaking his name. But Arthur retreated into a fortress of silence. With a methodical, almost brutal efficiency, he packed away every trace of Daniel. The tiny clothes, the half-finished box of animal crackers on the kitchen counter, the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, all of it vanished. At the time, she had seen it as a cruel erasure, a second death. She believed he was trying to forget, to move on as if their son had never existed, and a bitter resentment took root in her heart, a quiet poison that had tainted their interactions for decades. She saw his stoicism not as strength, but as a profound and unforgivable rejection of their shared loss. Now, back in the present, Eleanor pushed herself up on trembling legs, her joints aching with a pain that was more than physical. Her eyes, blurred with fresh tears, scanned the room again, absorbing the details with a devastating clarity. The faded blue hot air balloons on the wallpaper seemed to float in the gloom. A delicate mobile of hand-carved wooden planets hung motionless over the crib, coated in a fine layer of dust. Tucked in the corner was a small teddy bear, its button eyes staring out with a timeless patience. Each object was a perfectly preserved artifact of a life cut short, a testament to a love that had refused to die. Her gaze fell upon a small, dark wood dresser against the far wall, and she felt an almost magnetic pull, a sense of destiny, drawing her toward it. On top of the dresser, untouched by time save for the blanket of dust, sat a simple wooden box. It was plain, unadorned, the kind of thing Arthur would have made himself. Her fingers, still shaking, reached out and lifted the lid. A faint scent of cedar and old paper wafted out, the smell of preserved memories. Inside, resting on a piece of faded yellow flannel, were the treasures she thought he had destroyed. A lock of downy, blonde baby hair tied with a blue ribbon. A handful of photographs showing a chubby-cheeked toddler taking his first uncertain steps in their sun-drenched yard. And beneath them, filling the bottom of the box, was a worn, leather-bound journal. Her breath hitched. It was Arthur's, the journal he had kept for years before they were married, the one she thought he had abandoned long ago. She sank onto a small, three-legged stool that stood beside the dresser, the journal feeling impossibly heavy in her lap. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and a desperate, all-consuming need to understand the man she had lived with for half a century. With unsteady hands, she opened it to a page dated just a few weeks after Daniel's death. The script was Arthur's, strong, clear and steady, but the words were a raw, uncensored cry of a father's broken heart. He wrote of his overwhelming guilt, the feeling that he had failed in his most fundamental duty to protect his son. He described his pain as a private beast, a monster he had to cage inside himself lest it escape and devour what little was left of her. Turning the pages, Eleanor felt 40 years of misapprehension crumble into dust. Arthur had never forgotten. He had chronicled every missed milestone, writing letters to Daniel on birthdays they never got to celebrate. He detailed his secret visits to this room, where he would sit in the dark and talk to their son, telling him how his mother was the strongest woman he had ever known. even when her eyes were full of a sadness she tried to hide. Then she found the entry that broke her completely. "I see the pain in her eyes," he wrote. "It's a ghost in our house. If moving on for her means forgetting, then I will remember for both of us." The words weren't just an explanation. They were a confession of a love so profound it was willing to bear the entire weight of sorrow alone. The anger that had been her constant companion for so long, the cold stone of abandonment she had carried in her heart, simply dissolved. It was replaced by a wave of understanding so powerful it left her breathless. His silence had not been a wall to keep her out. It had been a shield to protect her. He had constructed this shrine not to hoard his grief, but to contain it, believing that if he could keep it locked away, she could be free. He had performed a 40-year act of silent sacrifice, the greatest and most painful expression of love he knew how to offer. It's truly humbling how some people carry the heaviest burdens in silence just to protect the ones they love. If you believe these stories of quiet strength deserve a voice, please consider subscribing. A new emotion, sharp and suffocating, took hold of her. Guilt. It was a crushing weight, heavier than any sorrow she had ever known. Guilt for misjudging the love of her life so completely. Guilt for the decades she had spent resenting his quiet strength, mistaking it for a cold absence of feeling. Guilt for her own survival, for the way she had managed to build a life around the hole in her heart while he had stayed behind, tethered to this room for her sake. She had spent a lifetime silently accusing him of forgetting, but the terrible truth was that she was the one who had tried to run from the pain, and in doing so had failed to see the true, staggering depth of her husband's devotion. A few days later, her grown children, Mark and Sarah, arrived, their cars kicking up dust on the long gravel driveway. They found her in the barn, sitting quietly on an old crate, the door to the secret room ajar. Their reaction was immediate and predictable, a mixture of pragmatic concern and deep discomfort. They saw the room not as a memorial, but as a morbid shrine, a place of unhealthy fixation that threatened their mother's fragile peace. "Mom, you have to close this up," Mark urged, his voice gentle but firm, laced with the well-intentioned but hollow logic of someone who views grief as a problem to be solved. "It's not good for you to dwell on this. It's been 40 years. Sarah, ever the more direct of the two, cut straight to what she saw as the solution. "We should sell the homestead. It's too much for you to handle alone anyway. A fresh start, Mom, in a condo, closer to town. Leave all this behind. Dad would have wanted you to move on with your life, not get stuck in the past." Their words, meant to be a lifeline, felt like stones, each one a dismissal of the profound truth she had just uncovered. They were asking her to do the very thing Arthur had spent his life preventing, to let Daniel's memory fade into nothing, to treat their family's deepest wound as if it were merely a scar to be hidden away. Eleanor listened, her gaze dropping to the tiny, woolen booty she had been holding in her hand. For the first time in a long time, she did not retreat into a shell of quiet compliance. Her children's desire to sanitize the past, to pack it away neatly, was a stark reflection of her own former coping mechanism, and she now saw its profound flaw with piercing clarity. A new resolve began to solidify within her, a sense of duty not just to her own rediscovered emotions, but to Arthur's silent 40-year legacy. This room was not about death, it was about a love that had endured it. The internal battle was just beginning, to find a voice for a truth she was only just beginning to understand, and to forgive herself for not seeing it sooner. The days that followed were a quiet pilgrimage. Eleanor spent hours in Daniel's room, not in sorrow, but in a state of profound and peaceful communion. She read Arthur's journal from cover to cover, absorbing the depth of his love and the vastness of his loneliness. She ran her hand over the smooth wood of the crib, traced the faint outlines of the hot air balloons on the wall, and spoke aloud to the two men she had lost in such different ways. The room was no longer a place of shock, but a sanctuary of connection. It was here, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's secret heart, that she started the slow, difficult work of forgiving him for his deception, and the even harder work of forgiving herself for her own blindness. A week later, Eleanor called Mark and Sarah back to the homestead, asking them to meet her in the barn. They arrived armed with brochures for retirement communities and the gentle, patronizing tone of children managing a parent's decline. They found her sitting on the old crate, the door to the nursery wide open behind her, a pool of soft light in the barn's dusty gloom. The air was thick with a tension that was different from before. It wasn't the oppressive weight of unspoken grief, but the charged stillness before a storm. Eleanor looked small against the backdrop of the barn, yet there was a new straightness in her spine, a clarity in her eyes that met theirs without wavering. She held the small, leather-bound journal in her lap, her hands resting on it not for comfort, but as if it were a source of undeniable strength, a testament to a truth they could not yet comprehend. Mark began, his voice carefully modulated to convey reason and care. "Mom, we've found a wonderful place. It's got a garden, a community center. You wouldn't have to worry about all this." He gestured vaguely at the vast, cluttered space, at the peeling paint and the looming shadows. Sarah added her own practical argument, her words sharper. "Dad wouldn't want you living in a museum, Mom. He wouldn't want you trapped by this sadness. Keeping this room open is like picking at a wound. You have to let it heal. You have to let him go, and you have to let Daniel go. It's time to close the door. For good. For your own sake. You need to choose the future, not the past." Their logic was a neat, sterile box, designed to contain a grief they found messy and inconvenient. Eleanor listened patiently, letting their words hang in the air and then dissipate like smoke. She did not look angry or hurt, only weary of a conversation that was happening on a completely different plane of existence from the one she now inhabited. Slowly, she stood up, the journal still in her hand. "You're wrong," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an authority that silenced them both. "You're wrong about your father. You're wrong about this room. And you're wrong about me." She took a step toward them, closing the distance, forcing them to see her not as a fragile widow, but as the keeper of a sacred history. "For 40 years, I thought your father's silence was a wall. I thought he had forgotten, that he had locked our son away and thrown away the key. I spent my life being angry at him for being strong enough to move on when I couldn't." She paused, opening the journal and holding it out as if it were a shield. This room was never about forgetting. It was his way of remembering for both of us. It's about the love that survived the absolute worst thing that can happen to a person. Her voice trembled, but did not break. "Your father spent 40 years protecting my heart from a pain he thought would destroy me, and I spent 40 years pretending mine wasn't broken. Today, that ends. He carried this burden alone so I could have a life. So I could raise you both without being a ghost. This isn't a tomb. This is a monument to a love so deep it was willing to live in the dark so that I could stay in the light." Her words were not an accusation, but a revelation, a truth that landed with the force of a physical blow. Mark and Sarah stood frozen, their well-rehearsed arguments and practical solutions rendered meaningless. For the first time, they saw the full, staggering dimensions of their parents' marriage, the silent, epic tragedy, and the equally epic love that had defined it. They looked past their mother at the small, dusty room with its faded hot air balloons, and it was no longer a morbid shrine, but a sanctuary. Eleanor watched the understanding dawn on their faces, a painful and necessary awakening. "I'm not selling the homestead," she stated, her voice now completely steady, "and this door is staying open. It's time Daniel came back into the house." Her decision wasn't a defiance of their wishes, but a quiet declaration of her own wholeness, a final, loving integration of every part of her life. The months that followed were not a period of mourning, but of gentle, purposeful construction. With a quiet determination that surprised her children, Eleanor began to transform the barn. Mark and Sarah, their initial resistance replaced by a deep, humbled respect, came on weekends to help. They sanded old floorboards, installed new windows that flooded the space with sunlight, and built small, sturdy tables and chairs. The work was slow and methodical, each hammer blow a punctuation mark in a new chapter of their family's story. The door to Daniel's room remained open, a silent, watchful presence. It was no longer a symbol of hidden sorrow, but an anchor of profound love. A reminder that the past was not something to be escaped, but a foundation upon which a new and beautiful future could be built. The scent of fresh paint and sawdust slowly replaced the musty smell of forgotten things. When Daniel's workshop finally opened, it was to the hesitant footsteps of a dozen local children, their eyes wide with wonder. The vast, sunlit space, once a tomb of silent memories, now echoed with the vibrant, chaotic symphony of creation, the scrape of crayons on paper, the soft thud of clay being molded by small hands, and above all, the sound of laughter, a sound that had been absent from the homestead for far too long, filled every corner. Eleanor moved among them, not as a fragile old woman, but as a calm, steady guide. She showed a young boy how to mix colors to capture the exact shade of the autumn sky, and helped a little girl glue feathers onto a paper bird. She was sharing more than just art supplies. She was sharing the quiet strength she had inherited from Arthur, transforming a legacy of private pain into a public gift of joy and possibility. Years passed, and the workshop became a beloved fixture in the small Virginia community. Eleanor learned that healing was not a destination you arrived at, but a continuous act of turning sorrow into service. Her home, once a place she associated with profound loss, was now defined by life, growth, and the endless potential held within a child's imagination. She saw the best of Arthur in the shy smiles of the children who found their voice through painting, and she felt Daniel's presence in every burst of uninhibited laughter. Her grief hadn't vanished, it had simply changed its shape, softening from a sharp-edged stone in her heart into a smooth, warm ember that fueled her new purpose. She had finally understood that love, true and enduring, doesn't die. It simply waits for an open door to find a new way to shine out into the world. Now 70, Eleanor sat on a stool, her face etched with a peaceful serenity as she watched a young girl proudly hold up a watercolor of a bright blue hot air balloon. The barn walls were a vibrant collage of children's art, a testament to the hundreds of lives touched by this place. On a small shelf near the open door to Daniel's room, a framed photograph of Arthur, his eyes crinkling in a rare, warm smile, stood next to the girl's painting. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the photo, a quiet conversation passing between them across the years. A soft smile touched her lips as she whispered, "Just for him. We did it, my love. We remembered." It's an honor to share these journeys of the human heart, and knowing you're here with us by subscribing gives these incredible stories the audience they deserve.